Hello and welcome to Atis Conflict Studio, where we try to manage conflicts. Today, we want to talk about remote work and how it has changed the team settings and the dynamics between different team members and how these virtual teams have been operating. Not too long ago, work was very straightforward. You would just commute to an office, had face to face meetings, and collaborations happened in real time. But workplaces have evolved. We see now remote work and hybrid work are a defining part of professional life. Nearly 20% of the global workforce are fully remote. And for the jobs that are remote capable, meaning that they can be done remotely, over half are in the US in some sort of hybrid model. This shift has unlocked a lot of flexibility. It also gave a lot of access to global talent. So you don't need to live in a certain area to be only able to apply for jobs in that area. This is also a great opportunity for employers because now they have access to a larger market and pool of staff. But it has also introduced certain challenges, especially when it comes to communication and conflict. Without nuances of in person interaction, misunderstandings can escalate pretty quickly. So, today we are going to unpack the unique dynamics of conflict in virtual teams and, more importantly, how to navigate them effectively. Let's just start with a scenario. Imagine Sarah and Tom are two members of a remote team. One, Sarah, is based in New York, and the other employee, Tom, is based in Germany. So, Sarah's style is quick Slack messages and quick turnarounds, while Tom is very comprehensive and he prefers really long emails. This would automatically be a dispute potentially, even in real life kind of in person work settings. Now, imagine we are talking about these two individuals working from different time zones, having different style of communications, and now trying to connect in a remote setting. So Tom receives this message. Hey, can you handle the client report? What would you understand from that? Sarah meant, actually, I'm asking you to handle the client report as soon as possible. But Tom was not even sure. He thought this is just the start of a conversation and clarifications will come. So the deadline arrives. Tom hasn't submitted the report and Sarah now is frustrated. Tom, in return, feels blamed for something that wasn't clearly communicated. Now we have two parties who feel both unheard, misunderstood, and frustrated. Does this sound familiar? Trust me, it happens more often than we think. And if you feel frustrated sometimes, I guarantee you are not alone. A lot of lines in communication have been blurred since we are working remotely. And conflicts can be more frequent because of that, and it's sometimes harder to resolve for a variety of reasons that we will discuss. So, in today's episode, our goal is to see what are the most sources of conflicts when we are dealing with remote teams and how virtual communication changes the conflict resolution. In addition, I'm going to share some practical strategies to manage misunderstandings, cultural differences, and time zone challenges in remote work. Now, let's look into some challenges that are very unique to virtual teams. Remote work has transformed the way that we collaborate, but it's not without its challenges. Unlike traditional office settings where communications happen organically, virtual teams rely heavily on digital tools. This can create a lot of gaps in understanding. And many of the conflicts that we see arise in remote teams stem from nature of the virtual work itself. And we will discuss some of the key challenges. When I say that there are some related to the nature of the remote work, That means systemic issue from an organizational ombuds standpoint. What do I mean by that? When we have a systemic issue, it means regardless of who you put in that position, these challenges will arise because of the nature of the issues that we are facing, not because of the interpersonal differences. So it means these very same people can be in a different setting or different titles or different teams or when we restructure an office, and those problems will go away. That's systemic. On the other hand, we have interpersonal issues, which means it has to do with the way people communicate, with people's culture, with people's preferences, and things that are very personal. So, some of the challenges that we face are lack of nonverbal cues. As you know, a huge chunk of what we understand from messages that people try to send to us is through nonverbal cues. It means we look at their faces, body language, the facial expressions, and we understand the intent. Sometimes they say up to 70% of the messages that are being understood is from nonverbal cues. Imagine taking away a big part of these messages. What will we have? Unnecessary tension because there is misinterpretation, misunderstandings that have nothing to do with individuals, but it's because of the lack of those cues. Another challenge is that we see that people are working in different time zones and there's a lot of scheduling issues. Already, when we are working in the same country, same time zone, we see that some people prefer to start earlier, finish earlier, some start later, finish later. And despite having some sort of core hours, we still see that some things don't go as well. Imagine now we add to this different time zones, which may be, somewhere else that is like 12 hours ahead, 8 hours ahead. That makes a huge difference. So that means we are having delays in responses. Delays in responses can have several effects on the way we function and we communicate and we understand each other. One is that because there is a gap, there will be a very great possibility of me interpreting things as opposed to going to the person and asking it. So I decide to interpret myself, which doesn't give the other person the opportunity to explain because of this delay in back and forth of the communication. It also causes frustration because the issues seem to be like lingering longer. It's not because someone is not addressing them. It's because just addressing them from different time zones, different kind of work schedules, make it harder for people to move forward because things naturally are taking longer. Also, in different cultures, what is urgent and what is, just a priority and what is a low priority is communicated very differently, especially when we have different workplaces in different geographical locations where they have different work cultures. For example, some place may just say, let's have this project done by this date. To someone, it may be, okay, this is the deadline. To some other people, it may be, no, if this was the deadline, you should have actually clarified it to me. You should have said that this is a hard deadline. You're not supposed to be late. If you are late, this will happen. So there's a lot of different kind of cultures that also can contribute to conflicts. We also see there is over-reliance on written communication. We all are already overwhelmed by the amount of communication we are receiving via emails, text messages, Slack messages, Teams messages, and WhatsApp messages in a lot of different workplaces, and so many WhatsApp groups with different colleagues or Slack between different teams. So imagine we are receiving so many communications. Sometimes it also can dilute what is important because when I have like 100 emails, I may delay getting to them altogether. So that also is overwhelming. And that leaves me with a little tolerance for sitting down and explaining something in writing in detail. And when those details are missing from a communication standpoint, we see that there will be a lot of fill the gaps because now I don't have the answer. I'm going to guess. And when we guess what happens, we are mind reading or we expect others to read our minds because we're sending short messages. What will be the outcome of that? The outcome is confusion, misunderstanding, misinterpretation, and sometimes escalation of this to tension and resentment. Sometimes also people work in different locations or different kind of environments where there is lack of shared context. For example, in certain locations, when someone says, I was, on a subway ride and I arrived late, I'm sorry, I had to go to a doctor's appointment. To someone, it may be something super quick. To someone, it may be, no, it actually was supposed to take 20 minutes. Now it takes 2 hours. And this is a huge problem for me. Another issue is that when we're together, one shout away, as they say, we can easily connect as human beings, right? And we are social animals, right? We want to connect with one another. We want to be close to each other. And when we are behind those screens, sometimes we feel isolated and left out. I'm not sure if you have experienced those virtual happy hours, but really after a couple of them, it doesn't feel the same way anymore. It doesn't feel like we're connected. It has still a huge gap compared to an in-person interaction. So when we have all these challenges that we discussed, what happens is that we will have a lot of misunderstanding and frustration, and that can build up quickly. Now, what will the actual conflicts look like in practice? Let's break down the most common types of disputes among virtual teams. So, depending on the dynamic and expectations of different teams, we will have different problems that exist because of the remote work. So far, we have discussed why these happens, and now we are discussing how they happen. What is going that problem look like? One is, like we said, miscommunication, assumptions. Let's aim to submit the project by Friday may have different meanings. When we are dealing with that in a remote work, in a text message or quick email, it may look very differently and be understood very differently. Also, sometimes it's a matter of accountability or work distributions. It's very hard to really see the workload when we are working remotely unless there is some, system in place. So it's possible to overcome this, but this can be a problem. Whoever is working, they may think isolated or not being supervised at some point. On the other hand, if the manager or supervisor is too involved, it may look like micromanagement. So it's a little bit hard to really see the work distribution and hold people accountable, and kind of how to hold people accountable and manage them without micromanaging them. It's really a fine line. It's a fine line. In real-time work, when we go to offices, imagine what happens when it is over remote work and, for people who may never even see each other in video for days or weeks. Another thing that's a huge problem is that decision makings will be delayed. When we are in an office, quick decisions happen organically. So we have, something that is a disagreement that people can just, I may just come to my colleague and stand there as I'm, sipping on my tea, and my colleague is just relaxing, and we have a casual conversation and we get to a decision. So that kind of moves things faster. But imagine now I have to email my colleague. My colleague needs to find a right time to read the email and then find the right time to respond. Then I have to find the right time to read the email and respond. So it automatically delays a lot of things. Also, when there's a small disagreements, like I said, it may just kind of snowball to a much larger disagreement because of all that mind reading and expectation of mind reading that exists. It already, again, exists in everyday life, regardless of if we are remote or in person, but it can be escalated when we are dealing with remote work. Also, another huge problem that I personally see in a lot of cases is the conflict of commitment. Now, I talk sometimes to employees and they say, okay, just because I'm working remote, it doesn't mean I have to just work 16 hours a day for this employer. I want to have a second job, or I want to have a side gig, or I want to make more money, or I want to pick a hobby, or I want to, go to a music class or something like that. Now, if the core hours are not clear and the flexibility is a lot, what happens is that because of this large scale flexibility and different expectations, you may have someone who is not working during the day and prefers working at night, and that may not be ideal for the supervisor. There are some people who just function better at night, and we are not talking about them. But imagine someone who has like 2 full-time jobs at the same time. And they say, okay, I'm working 16 hours a day. Yes, you're working 16 hours a day, but that's a huge conflict of commitment. Now, why does it matter when we are kind of in remote work? Because when we are in person, you go to an office in a certain time, so the person who is supervising knows what time they have your commitment to that work. But when we are working remotely, the lines are so blurred. It will look like intrusion in personal life. And a lot of employees want to set boundaries. On the other hand, the supervisors, especially when they're a middle manager, they want to report to higher ups and they want to have a clear understanding, but it's very hard sometimes to do that. Now, how do we resolve all these disputes? Of course, they're not going to go away overnight. And as we, work remotely, we're going to learn and get better at it and have a routine and all that. But there are ways that we can assist ourselves and our teammates to tackle these potential issues better and have some practical strategies to manage the workplace more effectively. One is that make sure that the style of your communication is communicated, meaning that I may say, I always write short messages, but feel free to ask for more explanation so that the other person doesn't feel like they are bothering or they are supposed to get the whole thing from this one message that you're sending. So let's say to Sarah, it may be enough to say, that time I need the project. But for Tom, it may not be as clear. He may need more clarification. But are we open to that? If they had one meeting and Sarah would say, by the way, whenever I send you a Slack message, you need more explanation, just shoot me a message, or we can set up a time for a video call to talk, that may resolve some of the issues. Also, we can use some structure formats when we are kind of dealing with things that are very kind of separate duties, or when there's distribution of tasks, or when there are multiple items that we want to be kind of attended to and we are not giving a laundry list, rather it's very specific. It's important to also write them very specifically. It doesn't have to be always long, but we can use bullet points, for example, or we can just clarify the deadlines are the deadlines and be clear. For example, it's 5 p.m. Eastern time on such and such date. That also helps. And always confirm understanding. You can confirm understanding, in different times when you're sending those messages. Also, you can always say, by the way, this is how I'm explaining, but it actually happens a lot that people have questions about these things. So don't feel that you have to wait for me. You can always come to me. My virtual doors are always open. So feel free to contact me. Also, we can always use multiple communication channels to try them out and see what people are comfortable with. For example, depending on personality, some people may not be too comfortable with video calls. Some people may be very comfortable or prefer video calls, depending on their personality types and preferences. Now, you may say every Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern time, we have these video calls and we expect everyone to be on the video because we want this to be like a time for, I don't know, let's say planning for next week, or this is a time that we want to get together as colleagues and make sure that this is as close to a real time meeting as possible. So we can't really always go one way or the other. I see sometimes, on Instagram, some of these coaches who maybe like self-proclaimed coaches say that, oh, like work is, when we say work from home, Home is where Wi-Fi is, and someone is sitting, by the beach and is just sipping on their beverage and or also answering some calls or just go with video off. There should be a balance, but ultimately, what matters is what works for the whole team and what the outcome of the work is. So people can be productive in different ways. And I think it is a matter of communicating that and also being respectful. We all think that whatever way of communication or whatever style we have is correct. That's why that's our style. But it's not about being right or wrong. It's about being collaborative. So we can always have like certain guidelines. For example, whatever right to you, I expect a 24-hour kind of and some sort of answer and acknowledgement in 24 hours. And if there is an acknowledgement, I want to know what the next steps are. For example, I got your message. I have to review these files and I'll get back to you in the next week or so. So have that basic communication. And actually, one of my colleagues is very good at it. Like he always responds very late. And that, as you may know, lawyers are notorious for being late and not responding a lot of times and being late in terms of like responding to messages. But I have this one colleague who is one of the busiest colleagues that I have and always sends some quick acknowledgement and says, I'm very busy for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to get to it. I calendared it for 2 weeks from now. I'm going to get to it. That way, I know that he's actually attending to it at some point. Imagine if I send a message, I don't get an answer. I sent a follow up in 5 days, I don't get an answer. In 2 weeks, he says, I'm on it. It's going to look very differently on the receiving end. So it's all about balancing. And also, we want to make sure that the team members are encouraged to voice their concerns without being afraid of judgment. And asking questions should be normalized. It shouldn't look like waste of time. It's actually a very necessary part of projects. Some people are so focused on doing the work that they don't really focus on having those kind of conversations. And then we see the project is halfway through and they see, oh, there was a misunderstanding here. Now that you have to kind of go back and do it again. It would have been easier if we spent a little bit more time on clarifying all of this beforehand than, doing all of it and now realizing that it was all on the wrong track. And also being mindful of cultural differences and not assuming. We can always ask open-ended questions. We can always say, this is my style. Let me know if it works for you. What is your style? Is there anything else you prefer? Have you worked in a different style that worked for your team? Maybe we can also look into those. And in that case, even if you don't really follow that, if they genuinely know that you are listening to their style, you are taking that into serious considerations, most of the times that's what the employee or staff members or team members really want. And lastly, we shouldn't wait for things to get real bad to be able to come to a boss or a supervisor. It should be that if there is a misalignment in deadlines, let's say, or there is some sort of issues that seem to be not so huge right now, but have potential for that, or may build up resentment, it's always good to have those conversations early on. And again, that's not waste of time. That's a preventative measure that can help a lot in preventing conflicts. Thank you for tuning in to Ati's Conflict Studio. It was great to discuss remote work with you and flexibility and the opportunities that remote work can offer to us, as well as the challenges that may arise. You got a story about remote work and have you handled remote work conflicts? Send them in. We would love to hear from you and we would love to discuss your stories in our next episodes. Remember, not all conflicts can be resolved, but every conflict can be managed.